Hello buzzers, John here, and welcome to this video where we're going to look at how we can add atmospheric effects to pictures. Now, by atmospheric effects, what I mean is turning something like this, a fairly straight shot of a swan on a lake shot through the reeds, to something like this, a really hazy, evocative summer scene that's packed full of emotion and has plenty of atmosphere. Now, between the two, that's the final shot and that's the starting point. And I think you'll agree that the final shot has a lot more mood about it. And you can create all of this mood just using layers in Photoshop. If I break it down, let's run through what's involved. That's our starting point. What we're going to do is create a sort of a misty layer just to occupy this space in the background. That's kind of a light blue colour that's blurred out and just sort of wafting across the frame. After that, we're going to use some digitally generated lens flare, which all comes from Photoshop, and that there kicks in the top corner and just comes down through. You can see these lens reflections within it. That's the kind of effect you get if you do shoot into the light with your lens. You'll see these little blobs of reflections as the light bounces around the internal lens elements. Okay, now we've got that, what we need to do is create a bit more bloom to give us more of a flare, and that's just a subtle tweak, so we'll just add that there. That's just a little bit of whitewash coming through here in a particular shape, just to show where our light source is coming from and how it's flooding the lens and lowering contrast in those areas. And then finally, to get that proper kind of summer evening look, we need warmer lighting. So to do that, all we're going to do is increase the red content of the scene and wash over a bit more red to give us that lovely kind of summer warmth in the shot. So it's all fairly straightforward, but it does use 4 layers. And if I open up the layers panel by going to window and down to layers, there we go, that'll pop up on screen and you can see exactly what's going on. There's our blue bit, there's our flare, there's our kind of bloom of the white, and there's our warm-up effect on top, all created by a curves adjustment layer. So we'll run through how this all happens. I'm going to get rid of all of those now, so I'm just going to make sure the first one's active, click on the last one there that's being used, and then I'm just going to drag them all to the trash can. So it's all gone. Oh dear, I'm back to square one. Right, so let's get started. The first one, we wanted that kind of misty, hazy, blue kind of fog mist stuff in the background. So let's make that first. To make it, we need a new layer. So the first thing we have to do is click on this icon here in the Layers panel, the Create a New Layer icon, and all we get is this blank checkerboard. So that's stage one. We've got our blank layer. Now to put something in it, we need that kind of blue misty colour. So we go over to the foreground colour swatch, we'll click on that, it's black at the moment, but we'll click on that, and we need to pick a very pale blue. So if we move the slider up in the colour picker to get in this kind of blue range here, this light blue, then if we go over towards the white and click, we see the kind of colour we're after. And that's was somewhere around there, that kind of zone. So right up towards the top left corner, somewhere between the white and the full colour of the blue. And that gives us a nice pale blue. We'll click OK to that, and all we've got to do now is park that somewhere in the scene. Now we could do this using a brush, or we could do it using a selection. I'm going to brush it on because that's nice and intuitive and easy to follow. So to brush it on, we select a brush tool, that's this one here, and then we need to pick a decent sized brush. We need a soft edge brush as well, so if we just click on this icon here, the drop down, we can pick soft round, and then we can change the size using the square brackets keys. So we can go up with the right square brackets key or down with the left. So I'm going to go to this kind of size here, and all I'm going to do, let's move my layers panel out the way a bit. I'm just going to kind of paint across. Now I don't want too much opacity, I don't want the brush to be too big and loud, so I'm going to take it down to about half measure, about 50% opacity in the brush, and I'll just kind of do a few blobs across the scene, something like that. I can put them wherever I like. They should go right to the background, but yeah, something like that. So it's kind of mottled and a bit broken up and not all the same depth and density throughout. So that's the kind of thing. That should do the trick nicely. What I'm now going to do is change the blending mode on that particular layer. So where it says normal, I'm just going to change it to screen. And that will give me a better effect, a mistier kind of effect. It's still too loud in the image at the moment, so all I'm now going to do is reduce the opacity of that layer. If we take it down to 0, nothing happens because it becomes invisible, so we just move it up until it looks about right. And I think somewhere like that looks quite natural and quite good. Just a little bit of mistiness creeping into the frame. So it's about half height, about 50% opacity with that blue brush coming through. Okay, so far so good. Now we need to introduce some lens flare. So I'm going to bring it out of this top corner here, and to create lens flare, what I need to do first of all is create a new layer. So we know how to do that. We'll just click on this icon here and we get another new layer called layer 2. That's blank at the moment, but what we want to do with this layer is fill it with black. Now, to get black, all you have to do is go back to your foreground color swatch. You can either click on that blue color and change it to black, or you can simply click on this icon here or press D. That gives you black as the foreground color. Now, to flood fill this entire layer with that foreground color, all you have to do is hold down the Alt key and hit backspace, and that flood fills it with black. Now, our image has gone, you might say it's a little bit underexposed now. We've gone a bit dark, but all we got to do is make sure that this black renders as invisible. We're going to choose the blending mode where only the lighter pixels show through. And that is the one we just used on the blue layer. We're going to pick screen again. So click where it says normal and choose screen. And the black layer becomes invisible. It has no impact on the image, but it does give us something to use for our lens flare, which is what comes next. So with this top black layer active, what we do is go up to filter, down to render, and over to lens flare. Click on that and you get the lens flare dialog, a good old-fashioned dialog box, and it gives you the chance to kind of move your lens flare around wherever you want in the scene. Now, I want it up in this top corner, so I'm going to click right in the top corner as far as I can go, and I'm going to then adjust the brightness. By default, it will be at 100. I'm going to go a bit brighter than that and push it out to about sort of 140, 150, that kind of area. 148% is what I've gone for. You can choose different kinds of lens characteristics with the flare filter. I'm using the 50-300 zoom because that gives me lots of nice reflections. You can of course go for a prime lens or a 105 prime or a movie prime even, which gives you a different kind of flare effect. But 50-300 zoom is pretty standard. That's often the default choice, so I'm going to use that one. So we got that set to 148%. I'm going to click OK, and that flare will be rendered on this separate layer. The reason I've got it on this separate layer is so I can switch it off or move it around. Because what I want to do is make it a little bit larger. I've got some nice sort of reflections running through here, which you can see the impact they have. It's quite subtle, in fact. If I didn't switch them on and off, you probably wouldn't notice these, but they will have an impact on the overall image. So we're going to leave them where they are. The one I don't like, though, is this one here. If I just change my cursor, this one here, right over the swan's head. I don't want that there because it's impacting on the image and it's getting in the way and creating a distraction. So I'm going to move my flare by enlarging it. And to enlarge it, I need to use the transform command. So to do that, couldn't be simpler. Just hold down the control or command key and hit T. That brings up a bounding box around the image, and I think it makes sense if we just zoom back a bit. I'll do that using the scroll wheel. We can then enlarge the flare to get that bit of flare out the way. So we just pull on the top corner. You don't need to hold shift if you're using the latest version of Photoshop. It goes in proportion automatically. So just pull it up and out the way and we can get the flare positioned exactly where we want it. We can pull down the bottom corner as well, and we can kind of juggle things around until we have our flare where we want it to be. And I think that looks pretty good there. So to set down the changes we've made to that transformation, we'll just double click inside the bounding box, though you can hit return as well, and that renders that change in high resolution, so it's now part of the picture. With that done, we've lost that rather artificial halo that was around our transform thing. If I just show it to you quickly, I'll go to the move tool, move it back into place. You can see there we've got this kind of ring that doesn't look very natural. I've moved that out of the picture, so that's out the way. But what we want to do is get a bit more of that kind of wash of low contrast that comes in from the scene. So what we need is some white at a low opacity, just kind of flooding across the scene. And the easiest way to get that is to create yet another new layer. So we create a new layer, and this is where we're going to put our kind of white wash just coming out of this corner and flooding down across the image. But we want the wash to be more intense at this top corner than at the bottom. So we're going to use for this the gradient tool. So if you grab hold of the gradient tool, you'll see that there's loads of options up here. And the one we're going to pick isn't the default choice, which is the linear gradient. We're going to pick this one here, which is the radial gradient. That gives us a gradient in the shape of a circle. And what we want to do is make sure we've got it set to the right setting. So at the moment it's on foreground to background, which is the default, but we want it on foreground to transparent. So we tick this second box here where we have the transparency, and that gives us a gradient which will go at the moment from black, the foreground color, to transparent. What we want though is white in this example, so we're going to just swap our black and white over by clicking on this arrow here or hitting X on the keyboard. That gives us white as the foreground color, and you see there the gradient changes from black to transparent to white to transparent because it's reflecting the choice we've made in our foreground color swatch. Okay, so now our gradient tool is set up. All we've got to do is draw it on the picture. So we've got our new layer all ready for it. There's nothing in that at the moment. That's where our gradient tool's going to go. And all we've got to do is start in the top corner and drag across to the bottom corner really. Release the mouse there. And we get our flood of white coming through the scene and washing out contrast. Now, just as our blue was a bit intense at first, this is a bit intense. So to take down the intensity, all we need to do is use that opacity control. So we click on that and then just move the slider back until we get a nice natural result. And again, it's about half height, about 50% looks pretty good. If we take it out entirely, we lose that kind of loss of contrast of shooting into the light. But if we take it up to about halfway, it looks about right. So there we go. I'll go at about sort of 45–50%, something like that. Now that's done, our image is looking quite nicely together, but the only thing I want to do is warm it up. We want to get that impression of a hazy summer evening with this shooting into the light lens flare running across the scene, but it's all a bit neutral at the moment, and what we want is some warmth to the image. We want to get sort of a red wash as though the sun's setting just out of frame and giving us that evocative feel of a summer evening. So to get a color wash, there are loads of ways of doing it in Photoshop, but what we're going to do is use an adjustment layer. So the adjustment layer icon is this one here in the layers panel. All you have to do is click on this half black, half white circle, and we can choose lots of different color tools to make things happen. But the one I'm going to choose in this instance is curves. So I pick curves, and that gives me a curves adjustment layer at the top of the layers stack. Now it's not doing anything at the moment, but what I have is my curves palette up on screen and there's my adjustment layer active. Now to make it work across the entire image, I just have to use it as it is, and all I've got to do is wiggle this line about to get a different effect. Now if I push it up, I'll boost the midtones and make them all brighter. I don't want to do that. If I put it down, I'll make everything more contrasty and darker. I don't want to do that either. So we'll leave that neutral and go about our change in a different way. Instead of having RGB set, which is going to affect the overall contrast of the image, what I'm going to do is use an individual color. I've got three to choose from, red or green or blue. So if I click on this drop down menu, red is the one I want. I want that kind of warmth of a sunset coming through the frame. So I click on red, and that gives me just the red channel. If I push it up, I flood the scene with red. If I pull it down, I flood the scene with the opposite of red, which is cyan. So I want to push it up a little bit, so I'm just going to ease it up just a touch. I don't need to go too far. Subtlety is really important with curves, and I think that's about enough there. If I go too far, it looks ridiculous, so I just want to just ease up the red channel just to give me a little bit more color into that, and I think that's about right there. The lovely thing about having it on an adjustment layer is I can use this toggle switch here, the visibility icon in the layers panel, to switch it on and off and see the impact it has. And you can see there the original looks a bit green, but if I switch it on, I get that nice warmth flooding through, and maybe I could go a fraction more. Let me just ease it up just a little bit more. Yeah, that's plenty now. So that gives me that nice kind of sunset warmth flooding across the scene. And with that done, I can get rid of this palette, just close it down to move it out of the way. It's still active, it's still working, but we don't need it cluttering up the screen. Let's zoom in a bit, and we can see there we've got quite a nice effect going on. Now the only thing I don't like, my little blob of flare here has crept in across my swan's face. I don't want that there. Now I know which layer it's on this flare layer here, so I can actually just remove that. All I've got to do is paint black across that blob and I'll get rid of it. So to fix that blob, make sure the right layer is active. That's the one we want to affect. Just switch it on and off to see the impact it's having to know you've got the right layer. And then we need black in the foreground color. So we'll click on this double-headed arrow here to get black as the foreground. Then we need a paintbrush. So we just select a brush and we've got a soft edge brush selected. Opacity, that's fine at 50%. We're just going to take the brush size down to about a little bit bigger than the blob. and then we'll just do a couple of clicks just to tone it down or even get rid of it entirely. And there we go. That's got rid of that blob. And if we want to check what we've done on that layer alone, we don't have to spend loads of time switching everything on and off. All we have to do is hold down the Alt key and click on the eye icon, and we'll just see that layer on its own. You can see that we've got quite a nice clean job of removing that blob. So that looks pretty good. Hold down Alt, click again to bring everything back on, and there's our shot. Switch them all off, we go back to our starting point, switch them all on, and we see what we've got to. And I think you'll agree that looks rather nice compared to our original, which looks a bit bland and a bit flat in comparison. So there you go, give that a try. It's actually a really easy technique to do. It does involve a lot of layers, but as you can see, it's just some very simple little layer tweaks stacked up on top of each other to bring about an overall benefit to the shot. So give it a whirl, find yourself a landscape, a portrait, a wildlife picture, whatever you want to use, and give it the impression of that contre-jour or into the light type shot with a bit of flair, a bit of mist, and a bit of atmosphere. Alright, thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.